Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Dennis Jacobs. I serve as Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here in person in Rose Hill and those who are joining us by Zoom to the 2022 State of the University Address and the beginning of the 2022-23 academic year. A video recording of today's address will be available on the website. I invite you now to stand, if you are able, for the invocation by the Reverend John J. Cicero of the Society of Jesus, our Vice President for Mission Integration and Ministry.
Good afternoon. Let's gather as we pray. Gracious and ever-loving God, today we reflect upon the state of the university to celebrate the many assets and accomplishments that we so proudly acknowledge, and to consider those challenges that impel our best efforts to address with determination and creativity. We ask your blessings upon our new president, Tania Tetlow, that her vision may inspire and guide our efforts as we engage the sacred mission of this university to promote the intellectual, moral, and religious development of our students. Bless our students, faculty, staff, and administrators, as together we collaborate to create a culture of encounter, respect, and dialogue. Help us to center our concern around a shared mission to foster the discovery of wisdom among our students and to advance their formation as competent and compassionate global leaders. And extend your blessings too upon our alumni and generous benefactors whose love of Fordham and passion for our mission enable us to flourish. We ask these blessings as always in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Father Cicero. It's now my pleasure to welcome Fordham's 33rd president, our leader, President Tania Tetlow.
Okay. I can't thank you enough for the welcome you've given me. I've spent these first few months meeting as many of you as I can, listening really hard and learning so much. In the midst of studying spreadsheets and beginning to hold long planning sessions, I've also just begun to scratch the surface of knowing Fordham. I'm building a pile of faculty books to start reading. I've been reveling in tales of your groundbreaking research. I went straight to Walsh Library to see our treasures. Did you know we have George Washington's journal? The director of New York's Catholic Charities has told me exactly how much it means to have the expertise of our graduate social work students. And I'm discovering so many other ways you serve the people of the Bronx and New York. I've learned that Fordham hosts one of the most important cybersecurity conferences in the world. And I had the honor of introducing the National FBI Director at Lincoln Center. Dr. Mark Nason gave me his signature tour of the Bronx, complete with amazing food stops, impressive even for a girl from New Orleans, and just a small amount of dancing. The students take selfies with me in a way that might just swell my head if I didn't go home to my 10-year-old every night. And when I can sneak away for lunch, I've gone to Spelman Hall and had rollicking discussions with the Jesuits on everything from physics to symphonic music and back again. It all makes me so glad I came. I've also spent these last weeks learning from my leadership team who bring a total of 222 years of experience at Fordham to their work. They are as smart and effective and tireless as Fordham deserves. And with them, I'm busy making sure we break down the silos that inevitably creep up in any large, sprawling organization. I'm also trying to convince them that their job is to tell me when I'm wrong. I want to introduce two new members of that senior team whose appointments were announced shortly before I started. John Buckley, who is brand new as our VP for enrollment, but has actually worked at Fordham for 38 years. He probably feels like a little bit like Prince Charles in the line of succession. Hey, John. And Dr. Ann Galen, our new Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, who came to us from Yale in a major step up. She's finally reached a Jesuit institution. Congratulations. I should tell you a little bit about myself, but I feel entirely overexposed. Though I need you to know that my mama has 50 copies of that Fordham magazine at her house. As you know, I hope by now, I exist because of Fordham, because my parents met here as graduate students in the late 60s. And in a little twist of that story, my dad was actually a Jesuit priest when they met. So the details of their courtship were always very vague in my family. But he made the agonizing decision to leave the Jesuit order that he loved after 17 years because he really wanted to have a family. And so I was born here in New York. We moved back in my childhood to New Orleans, where my dad is from, and I grew up there. And in my one little act of rebellion, I did not go to Jesuit schools or work at Jesuit schools at first. I have made up for it since then. But I was a lawyer and a law professor, chief of staff at Tulane, which is a university of similar size and scope, and had experience in how do you turn a big ship? How do we leap ahead in our ambition? But with Loyola, which is literally an inch away from Tulane University, they are next to each other, came calling. That pull of Jesuit education and mission was very, very strong. I feel like they secretly, the Jesuits in my family, prepared me as a Manchurian candidate for this work without actually telling me my whole life. And it is the pull of faith. It's the pull of mission. It's the overarching purpose I will be talking a lot today. Now, some of you have asked me, a couple of you in your blunt New York way, which I love, whether I'm putting on a show as the First Lady President with all this God stuff. And I need you to know that this is entirely core to who I am. The reason I'm so happy to be here is because I am incredibly ambitious for Jesuit education, for who we are and what we do and why we do it, and the kind of impact we can have on the world because we are fueled by mission. But as exciting as it is to be here, it's also a daunting time to be in higher education. And I need to be depressing for a minute before I get hopeful, so bear with me. We are up against so many things. We just lived through 2.5 hellish years of a global pandemic. The energy we mustered to rally through the crisis has stretched into a long, exhausting slog. We hope that the worst of the pandemic is over, though I need everyone to knock on wood immediately as I say that. I'm not kidding. Okay. We still have to grapple with the aftermath of the pandemic, no matter what, because we are only beginning to understand the effect this has had on a generation of young people. From the fog that settled on so many high school students now applying to college, to the educational deficits created by delaying reading for millions of kids. Test scores show that we've lost 20 years of progress in closing the opportunity gap. We also don't begin to know the impact of isolation and trauma on this generation. It's one thing for me to lose 2 years of my middle age. It's another for them to lose 2 years of their adolescence. Those social skills, to be surrounded by anxiety. And so at the moment when we ourselves are most exhausted, our students require ever more from us, more reassurance, more inspiration, more patience. We have compassion fatigue just at the moment when they most need our compassion. And we have fewer resources to help them. Higher ed took a collective hit of $85 billion in lost revenue during COVID, not counting the extra expenses of testing and masks and filtration systems. Congressional aid helped, but it didn't begin to make us all whole. And even before COVID, we faced a constant struggle of providing the students the excellence they deserve at a price that they can afford, which is getting harder and harder. And now rising inflation has hit our cost and all of you in brutal ways, but it hasn't and can't hit our tuition rate at the same level. Because of all of this, it often feels like we take 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. Here at Fordham this fall, we were up by 8 million this year because of larger undergraduate class and summer school, but down 10 million in smaller than projected graduate classes, where we're competing with a very hot job market. And our issues collectively in higher ed are not just financial. The American public has been losing faith in all of its institutions for decades, and that growing mistrust has spread to education and universities. Not only do more and more people worry about our political intentions, they aren't even sure there is a point to research and science. I remember debating vaccines with my 90-year-old aunt until she interrupted me with, "Tania, you have your facts and I have mine." And I try to make clear she could have her opinions, but there's only one set of facts, but she was having none of it. The very concept of truth is under attack. We live in a time when conspiracy theories flourish, when manipulation and propaganda can be funneled through open social media channels, sometimes even by bots and foreign governments. Our country and our church is cleaving into 2 sides. We're barely able to shout at each other across the growing chasm. When polled, we no longer want our children to marry someone of a different political party. We seek news that reinforces our own views. And some of our students even object to hearing ideas different than their own, as if that weren't the whole point of education. We've lost the sense of making sacrifices for the public good, in part because this country has always had a fractured sense of who the public is. The cracks of racism and misogyny are rumbling and widening, and the tide of selfishness grows stronger. And just when you couldn't get any more depressed, there are ominous signs that democracy itself is beginning to crumble. I say all of this not to drive you to drink, but to remind us of why our work has never been more critical. We have a choice here. We can bury our heads in the sand and pretend none of it is true. We can wish in vain for a bubble over our campus that would somehow insulate us from the ways the world is coming apart, to just wish it away by ignoring it. Or we can realize that working at this university, in this city, at this moment in our history, means that we matter enormously, that we have the power to make a difference, because we stand for things at Fordham that are important. We stand for the search for truth, for finding answers to the world's toughest problems. We build on the proud Jesuit tradition of academic excellence, of endless curiosity. We look for answers, always with the humility and willingness to be wrong. We stand for teaching citizens in the broadest sense of that word, students rooted in the lessons of history, the understanding of government, the empathy learned from literature and art. We fight against the tide of disinformation, the dopamine hit of social media that has literally changed the wiring of their brains. We help our students become critical thinkers and compassionate people. We fight against the scourge of racial and other forms of hatred. We teach our most fundamental values, human dignity, welcoming the stranger, and understanding that we are all loved equally by God. At a time when the richest 10% of Americans owns almost 90% of the country's wealth, we fight against the ways the game is rigged. We refuse to squander this country's talent. Fordham brings elite academic excellence to students from everywhere, from poverty and privilege, from every creed and color. 20% of our students are the first in their family to go to college. carrying the hopes and dreams of generations on their shoulders. Almost half of our undergraduates are students of color. Fordham transforms lives. We work tirelessly every day, all of us, to bridge the gap between the excellence that they deserve at a price they can afford. We control our costs. We find new and creative ways to be efficient, remembering that every dollar we spend represents the life savings of our families. Most of all, we bring ever more ambition to our work because we have the power to make a difference in the broader world around us. So why us? Why now? Because we walk in some pretty big footsteps. When Ignatius and his 10 friends decided to found the Jesuit order, they had some decisions to make. Logically, they should have stayed put in Rome and grown their numbers. That would have been the normal higher ed approach: develop a 10-year strategic plan and form many committees. But they didn't. They headed out to the far corners of the world immediately, to India, Japan. They founded schools, ultimately at a pace of 3 universities a year. By the 1700s, they had a total of 700 colleges and universities on 5 continents. The Jesuits were ambitious. They were brave. They had, to use the appropriately ecumenical word, chutzpah. Now, we in modern higher ed are not so good at being nimble. We've generally resisted outside influence and trends, but we now face a pace of change that threatens to leave us in the dust if we don't decide where we fit in the modern world. And we face a modern world that just might fall apart if we don't step up to the plate. But I can just feel some of you thinking, how will we do that when we don't have as many resources as 2 other unnamed schools in New York? So let's talk about that. There have been 2 major trajectories to success for universities. The first, very traditional one, is the obvious path of our Ivy League colleagues: centuries of serving privileged students. A strategy that included in the past turning away many of our own Catholic and Jewish immigrant ancestors. The students they did serve became successful alumni who in turn gave generously and built up massive endowments. That option obviously isn't available to us. We stand on different moral ground, a foundation of serving those students turned away by others. And you know what? We refuse to be embarrassed by that. So how do you catch up to the power of compound interest over centuries? When we look at those schools that have achieved great leaps forward, there have been 2 simple answers. First, they are innovative. They find a way to move quickly without years of committees and study. And at the very thought of giving up years of committee and study makes a few of you cringe. You realize why it's so rare. They're willing to take calculated risks to leap ahead. More on that in a minute. And second, those schools that catch up also know how to play the long game. They've made the kind of investments they knew wouldn't pay off for years. Their faculty and staff have made the decision to stop fighting internally over their share of a shrinking pie and focused on growing the pie. When I was a child, my dad used to stop us every time we walked past a live oak tree, those big, majestic trees draped in moss, and tell me, the person who planted that tree did it for their grandchildren, not for themselves. And we passed a lot of oak trees in New Orleans, so I heard this a lot. But he was right. And so it is with us. The people who planted those elm trees on this campus did it knowing they wouldn't be beautiful for generations to come, but they did it anyway. And the success and resources we have today at Fordham came from people just like us who carefully set aside money at the end of every year to grow in the endowment or to invest in new programs, new research, new ideas. They invested in us. If they hadn't, we would be a very different Fordham with very little chance of catching up. So our job now, in turn, is to plant new seeds, to play the long game, to be creative. Because at this moment in higher ed, the riskiest bet available is to double down on inertia, on short-term thinking. Now, let me be clear. I don't mean change for its own sake, big dramatic gestures unmoored from our realities. I mean the willingness to take smart, calculated risks. As I read the history of Fordham this summer, I came across a quote from one of my predecessors in the 19th century that made me laugh. When he became president, he told everyone his motto was change nothing, improve everything. It's funny, but ideally that's what we do. We change nothing that matters most to us, nothing fundamental, but we constantly improve. The good news is that this trait is written into our DNA as a Jesuit institution. The Jesuits have a principle called indifference. It's an odd name because it also sort of means the opposite of indifference. It means we decide what matters most, our guiding principles, our mission, our purpose, and to those we cling fiercely, but we let go of our attachment to everything else. Indifference also means prepare yourself, letting go of our attachment to the way we've always done things. And that's obviously easier said than done. Back in the day, there were Jesuit professors in Italy who taught astronomy to a very annoying but promising student. This kid was blunt and sarcastic and arrogant, your basic nightmare. His name was Galileo. The faculty dutifully explained to him what they knew to be true, going back to Aristotle, that the sun rotates around the earth, very particularly around Italy. But Galileo used his newfangled telescope to prove that everything he had been taught was entirely wrong. Now, there are two ways to react to a student like that. Father Clavius, one of the most distinguished astronomers of the age, took the typical approach and dug in. He was so eager not to be proved wrong that he refused to look through the telescope. But Father Christopher Greinberger managed to put aside his own ego, his attachment to what he thought he knew, and was convinced by his own student to abandon his beliefs. The question for Fordham is whether we will be Clavius or Greinberger. And it's a question for me, but also for all of us, because this isn't about waiting for big dramatic moves from the center. But even the best new ideas can quickly get swallowed up in a large organization resistant to change. And also, there will be very little that I can do without you. The kind of innovation we need must come from me, but also from everywhere, at every level, and every part of the work we do. Not just the great big ideas like our Lincoln Center campus was in the 1960s, but the thousands of smaller ways we find to become ever better. So let me give you some examples of how you already do this. You've built new high-speed computer clusters, and suddenly a research data question that took one of our faculty members 8 months to process now takes a day. You launched a success hub this morning where students can get easy and intuitive access on their phones to all the resources they need. They'll have a roadmap of courses they need for graduation, list of potential scholarships, ways to connect to alumni and careers. In the classroom, where COVID taught us what not to do with technology, many of you are becoming more creative. A couple of our faculty are teaching medieval history by creating augmented reality programs. Students can walk around New York, hold up their phones to a gargoyle on a building, and immediately get an overlay of information from their teachers. You've been finding creative efficiencies. IT has been busy identifying those ancient processes that exist in every organization, the ones that drive you crazy with 57 steps on duplicate forms, and automating those processes to have our systems talk to each other, to carve back our time and our sanity. Bless them. Did you know that Facilities has built the largest solar field in the city of New York to help power our campus, and that they've reduced our carbon footprint by almost a third? And it's not just about technology. Faculty doing cutting edge research spend their days thinking about complicated problems in different ways, turning them sideways, looking at them differently, finding the answers that elude everyone else. Innovation means taking up our greatest challenges here on campus, like preventing the scourge of campus rape or grappling with racism and bias. When the world doesn't have the answers, we'll keep trying to find them here ourselves. And by the way, those are two issues I've spent my whole career trying to resolve, so you will hear a lot from me. about how we can do better. Innovation also comes in the small problems we solve every day, each of us, the ways we can save some money in one spot that free up resources for what matters more to us, the ways we become more efficient and clever. As we keep doing this work, as we up our game, we'll celebrate our successes, but we'll also celebrate our glorious failures. Because even when the coin toss doesn't go our way, even when the creative ideas don't entirely work, we'll learn, we'll dream bigger. Of course, good innovation isn't about throwing spaghetti at the wall to see if it sticks. So how do we make the right decisions and take on the right risks? You'll hear me talk a lot about my Uncle Joe, who's a 91-year-old Jesuit and my personal Obi-Wan Kenobi. He really may be the wisest man on the planet. I think some of you agree. While I was agonizing over COVID decisions these last few years, he kept telling me, the answer to the crisis can be found inside the crisis, over and over again. And it got really annoying because I didn't know what he meant. And I knew I was supposed to. But then it dawned on me. This is one of those great insights of Jesuit discernment. Instead of trying to project the answer from the outside to use the pre-made solution, we find the answers by digging into the particulars of the problem here, of how it presents itself with us at this moment. I imagine that some of you will be eager for me to present a fixed vision of the strategy ahead, but right now I am in deep discernment mode and trying very hard to avoid jumping to conclusions or thinking I have the answers too quickly. I've started with the data and the spreadsheets, asking for trends over time. I've pulled down that dusty pile of task force reports that exist at every university that have given me great insights. I've also been studying our history, not because we are bound by it, but because we work within the culture created over 181 years. And with that, I have the great resource of Dorothy Marinucci, who can quickly tell me what we last tried in 1892, why it didn't work, and who's still hot about it. Next month, I'll circle back to you to present what I've been finding with data and charts and my insights thus far. I'll talk to you about the strategies we're trying to sort through, everything from figuring out the optimal class size to how we invest in growth and how we will try to find those answers together with you. I will answer every question that you have, and I'll even do it twice, once on each campus. But today I want to focus on why it all matters. These last few years, as I've watched the news every day, and embarrassingly sometimes avoided watching the news because it has become so depressing, it feels like we're at a real tipping point. Growing up, I used to be jealous of people who lived during World War II or the Civil Rights Movement because they had such dramatic opportunities to be heroes. And now that we all have the curse of living in interesting times, we've learned that no one puts up a sign saying heroes turn this way or major moral choice on the horizon. Instead, those chances come in 1,000 daily decisions, little things that add up to big things. And right now we have to decide whether to take our heads out of the sand, to realize how many times a day we make little decisions that effectively fritter away our children's future because we so often choose to do nothing. But we at Fordham in New York, we have the power to do so much more. You may not feel that right now, but here's what I want you to know as I join you. We build on enormous strengths. Fordham is one of the elite Catholic universities in the world. For almost 200 years, it has launched students into lives and careers that make a difference, including the leaders of many of those other Catholic institutions around the world. We create opportunity. Not just that, Fordham sits at the center of the global economy. We can and do have the ability to convene the powerful to solve problems. And that's what Jesuit universities do. I imagine some of you are sitting there thinking anxiously that the mission thing is all good and well, but what about that really difficult higher ed market I told you about at the beginning? But here's the good news. Doing the right thing will help us succeed. Having an impact will help us compete in our crowded market because this generation of students wants that. They demand that. They've grown up understandably cynical in a broken world. They want to challenge authority, fix systems, question orthodoxy. They demand that we move beyond our own narrow self-interest. And there's actually nothing more Jesuit than that. That is who we are. We need to explain that to them, but that is in fact who we are. So while our competitors are busy virtue signaling with platitudes and empty claims, we have credibility, and we can do so much more to create opportunity for our students where it doesn't exist, to help heal society's growing divisions by working harder ourselves to model a culture of inclusion, both among the students and here among ourselves, to engage ever more with our own community in the Bronx, one of the poorest in the nation, because our futures are entirely intertwined, to prove to our students that we do care about the planet they will inherit and what we teach and what we model here on campus, but also in the ways our faculty find the answers through science and business and law and so many things, to lean into the church's teachings in Laudato Si, to harness the moral authority of values that can sometimes cut through political rationalizations, to invest more in world-changing research and impact. Because nothing we argue about in our various committees will mean squat if the world comes apart around us. And one last thing. Part of the magic of being at a university is the chance both to have an impact ourselves and to be a force multiplier. Because when we're feeling a little tired and cynical, we have the privilege of teaching thousands of students a year to take up the baton. Young people full of hope and idealism, full of new energy. And it's not just the faculty who do that. We teach students in the residence halls, and while we negotiate financial aid with them, we teach them in conduct proceedings. Boy, do we ever. And when we're serving them food or changing light bulbs in their rooms, they learn from all of you. And here's my plea. This generation does not need any help becoming more cynical. They have already learned how not to trust and how badly our systems are broken. What they do need help with desperately is how to build things, how to solve complicated problems with complicated solutions. Because when the world tells them that problems are complicated, it can sound like an excuse or just an unpleasant reality that they choose to ignore. We need to give our students the tools to engage in complexity, to push for the best results within constrained choices, instead of just deciding that they prefer to believe that choices aren't constrained. Our students need the skills to make a difference in the world, but not just that. They need the emotional intelligence to make a difference. They need to understand that liking a protest video on TikTok or indulging in displaced anger does not count as effective activism. We at Fordham can model for our students how not just to tear down, but to build, to solve, to inspire. Thank you all so much for the welcome, for being here today, and for listening so hard. I will spend every ounce of energy I have trying to be worthy of you in this remarkable university. I can't wait to get to know each of you. Thank you.
Tania, thank you for your inspirational address. I know we are all both filled with challenge, but also with hope. And we are so grateful for your leadership. This concludes today's State of the University address. I want to thank all of you who are here in person and those who've joined us on Zoom. And I wish you all a healthy and productive year. Thank you. God bless.